Good afternoon, everybody. I was just checking whether everybody's up. There is no clock here, so we don't have to wait till 4:07 to start. And especially since our distinguished speaker has a flight to catch immediately after this presentation. So let me get to it. We have an unusually distinguished speaker today with us, who is going to be the last speaker in this series on events and topics in bioenergy. Ann Lazarus has dedicated her career as an architect to advance sustainability. So it's really fitting that she agreed to come here and talk to us today. She is the founder of the Sustainable Design Initiative at HOK, a global design firm, and continues to lead the firm's work as a senior vice president and firm-wide director of sustainable design. She has co-authored the seminal textbook, the HOK Guidebook to Sustainable Design. Her career has focused on accelerating the profession's ability to create green buildings and communities in every building type and region. Her devotion to sustainability has extended outside her firm through her role as an author, as a lecturer, a community advocate, and volunteer at the local and national level. She has served as program committee chair for Green Build, the U.S. Green Building Council's International Annual Conference, for 5 years. And during that time, she also helped lead the U.S. Green Building Council's response to Hurricanes Katrina and Rita that resulted in the publication of the New Orleans Principles. In 2008, Ann led the formation of HOK's alliance with the Biomimicry Guild to integrate nature's innovations in the planning and design of buildings, sites, and cities worldwide. This partnership is beginning to define a new sustainable standard for the architectural profession, and I believe that she's probably going to speak a word or two about it to this effect. Most recently, Ann directed a year-long research effort and rigorous design exercise to establish a new prototype for affordable zero-carbon emissions office buildings. And those of us who think about the continued use of energy by the global population, it's something to take to remember that 40% of all the energy that's used in this country are used in the context of buildings. Ann is also currently serving on Washington University's Board of Trustees, and on behalf of the Photosynthetic Antenna Research Center, PARC, and the International Center for Advanced Renewable Energy and Sustainability, ICARES, I welcome Ann Lazarus to conclude our Fall 21 events and topics Bioenergy Series. And I could have said many more things, but that would have taken 20 more minutes of our time.
And I think we're turning this one off and turning this. Can you hear me okay? All right. Thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here talking at my alma mater in a university setting. I'm a daughter of a professor of physics, so I have great respect for the institution and also a lot of trepidation about speaking to scientists about a topic that is science-based, and I'm not a scientist. I practice architecture. So if we have time at the end, I'll be interested in your reaction to my comments, and you can drill holes in them, because I'm talking about topics that I care deeply about but don't necessarily have a deep knowledge in. I want to talk today about biomimicry in the built environment. So Himadri mentioned the alliance that we've been working on for 3 years now with the Biomimicry Guild, and that has really been a real interesting transition for me and our firm. I think a very important one. I like to start with this image of what you can see outside right now, which is trees at this time of year, which adapt to a change of season, and they recognize the systems have generated over time a way to deal with loss of energy source, sun, and heat through, in this case, changing of leaves and eventually losing leaves. And it's a great metaphor to me about what we need to be doing in the built environment. We need to take a very similar approach. We need to transition how we currently don't adapt to seasons, don't adapt to conditions, to take strategies like this for survival. So it's a great way to think about how we can be different. and beautiful. And as Hamadri mentioned, why am I up here talking about this? Well, the built environment is a huge resource hog. I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but these kinds of statistics, which come from the World Resource Institute, 48% of total energy use, 17% of fresh water flow, half of the greenhouse gas emissions attributable to the built environment. I won't go into all of them, but clearly there's an opportunity to do something about this if we could get it right in the built environment. These proportions go up in urban areas, and of course we're having rapid urbanization across the globe, so it's even more of an opportunity / challenge. And that's why my firm decided 20 years ago, so we were very kind of early adopters, that because we were a global firm, that we had a responsibility and an opportunity to do something about this. And we've been working at incorporating sustainable design strategies ever since. I'd say we're making progress, not anywhere close near, satisfactory. So why have we gotten ourselves into this? This is where I'm going to practice economy, and I never had a college course in economy, so anybody here an economist, I apologize. But I like these diagrams, the ones on the left. Can you see this okay? Is it blurry, or is it just me? I don't know. Who's our AV guy? Yeah, we want better clarity. So the top left is, an example of. Don't make it dark because they'll fall asleep. That's the wrong way. See if this is better. Is that okay? All right. So, the traditional, post-industrial revolution North American model is that the environment is a subset of the economy. And there's an infinite amount of resources. We use the resources until they're done, and then we throw them away, whatever away is. And that's been, the model for, hundreds of years. More recently, this concept of triple bottom line, I'm sure you guys have heard about triple bottom line, right? The three circles in the middle, economic, social, and environmental should be, at parity, and the ultimate goal is to find things that will serve all three. So that's this idea of they're equal. And the one at the bottom left, which is more derived from natural systems thinking, is recognition that, in fact, the health of the economy and the health of our social systems is entirely dependent upon the health of the planet. So if we don't have a healthy planet, none of us will survive. It doesn't matter whether we're flora, fauna, animal, plant, mineral. Well, minerals will survive. And so really, if we can think about it, that in fact we are actually a subset of the environment, that will give us a new insights on how to move forward. And in the built environment world, I like this diagram, which really looks at this in a different way. So on the left, maladapted, as we're calling it here, is sort of the business as usual design of the 20th century. The one that I studied, well, I mostly studied when I was an architecture student right across south of here. And the idea is that, the beautiful buildings or not so beautiful buildings, but it really doesn't matter where they're located. You can have a glass tower in Saudi or a glass tower in Alaska as long as you heat or cool it appropriately. So no recognition of place. And that's sort of the maladapted 20th century modern architecture model. And then moving to the right along that continuum, you have what is less bad. So being environmentally responsible is not being as bad. So the LEED rating system, which is a really great tool and has certainly changed many people's mindset around, what green building is, including this building, which is a good example, is about being less bad. So LEED silver, gold, platinum, etc., kind of reduces the impact. Even carbon neutral is about being less bad. Living buildings is, an aspirational goal, which in fact has been met by Washington University at the Tyson Center. So I think this university should be very proud of that accomplishment, and that's trying to be neutral. It's all, the energy is on site, all the water is on site, the materials are locally procured, and it is, the waste is all processed on site. And that's as replicative as we have been able to achieve in this country. And by the way, if you didn't know it, WashU Tyson Center just won an award national award for that effort, which is really terrific. On the far right, we have regenerative design and biomimetic thinking. So this is how can we actually use nature and nature's processes and measures as what we want to produce in the built environment. So that's what we've been thinking about. And the way that HOK has come to this, and Dan was just asking me about this, is we have formed an alliance with the Biomimicry Group, which is a group that was founded by Janine Benyus. We met Janine through a series of meetings. She met with leaders at HOK, and we sort of came up with this concept of what would it mean to take biologists and mix them with designers of large-scale projects across the globe. And given our commitment to drive sustainability, we thought, why not? Let's try this experiment out. And it's been a really interesting ride. So that's for the last 3 years. And the goal of that has been to find new ways to expand our impact together, new and different ways, to collaborate with nature, understand what nature's telling us, and to really drive new forms of innovation about not doing things the old way, but completely new ways. And we do that by having what the Biomimicry Group calls biologists at the design table. So we have their trained biologists who have really learned how to talk to architecture designers. We're not, we don't talk the same language at all. So they have spent time on that to join our teams early, and certainly we've learned the longer they're with us, the more impact it has, just like anything in design. The earlier, the better, and the longer. So I'm going to go through with you some of the projects we've been doing together. But one of the things we discovered in this process is that we're not talking about biomorphic design. And biomorphic design refers to buildings or other elements that resemble living organisms. So, this is an extreme example of this fish form, which is lovely. The bird's nest in Beijing is a biomorphic form. And it's, one of the more beautiful buildings you've ever seen. But it's really not biomimetic. It's not biophilic. And I don't know how many here have heard this term. Anybody heard this from, besides Bruce and Phil? Biophilic? Okay. You guys would be cheating. Biophilia is a growing and important new field which recognizes the natural affinity of the humans with natural elements like daylight and views and shadow and diurnal swing. So we have a need to have that kind of connection is what we're learning. And this concept is so beautifully demonstrated in the work of Faye Jones on the left in Arkansas, the Thorn Crown Chapel, or Falling Water by Frank Lloyd Wright. So those are biophilic examples. Biomimetic is different. It's about understanding the way nature functions, how natural systems solve problems, and applying that, extracting that to a different kind of solution. So an example could be the male cardinal. The color red in the male cardinal is visible any time of day, well, not any time of day, any season, at bright red. Is it possible that the bright red of a stop sign is really mimicking the bright red of a cardinal? You can see it. Bucky Fuller really understood this. Buckminster Fuller, who taught here at one point. He studied nature as a source of inspiration for his work, but not as something to replicate. I love this quote: "We do not seek to imitate nature, but rather to find the principles she uses." And he really studied this very hard. The example of the climatron, which was done by Mackey's firm, but inspired by Buckminster Fuller's geodesic dome, uses minimal materials like the tortoise shell here to create a very strong form, but then mutates it by providing a glazed exterior instead of a solid exterior because of the function of bringing light in. But very similar kind of natural systems derived solution. So the question is, how do we understand what nature's doing and apply it to our work and in the built environment? And what we have gotten really and a great appreciation for over these years with the Biomimicry Group is something they call life's principles. Life's principles represent the overarching patterns found among species surviving and thriving on Earth. And they've been identified through efforts by biologists who look across species to identify certain patterns that are consistent and become the lessons that we. The life's principles at the highest level, and there's different hierarchy here. There's 6 life's principles. I'm going to go through each one. And they fundamentally define a set of strategies, questions that we can use to try to develop our understanding about how to apply these lessons from nature to our work. And there's really 3 ways you use the life's principles. You can see vaguely on the perimeter. They can serve as models, so actually strategies to drive innovation to different kinds of solutions. They can be used as metrics, so how can we define the benchmarks, measurable outcomes from nature as a metric that we try to aspire to in our designs. And they can serve as mentor, as an aspirational ideal for us to work to. Let me go through these pretty quickly, but I think it's really important, and one of the best things probably you get out of this lecture is the life's principles, because they really, to me, work. And in fact, I use them now for, anything. Problem solving, what to do about my kids. It's just kind of nice to think about, these are principles that have made sense for 3.8 billion years, and maybe they can make sense for any number of things. So the first life's principle is about adapting to changing conditions. Nature does not live in an equilibrium. There's no stasis in nature, but we must constantly adapt to dynamic contexts through resiliency strategies such as variation, redundancy, and decentralization. Dramatic change through tree fall. So on the left, the forest can change overnight through tree fall. That's not something that could be predicted. Can actually create opportunities for new growth within a stable climax communities. Over time, these disturbances may positively affect the makeup and evolution of the entire community. On the right, a palm tree is a great example of a plant that is adapted to high winds and hurricane conditions through a flexible trunk and a leaf form that allows the wind to flow right through without damaging the leaf. So a couple examples of that principle. Next principle has to do with being locally attuned and responsive, to use readily available materials and energy, leverage cyclic processes, and feedback loops. This is a principle that has a lot of parallels in the environmental design movement, recognizing that natural systems take full advantage of what's available locally and freely. Natural systems don't bring power in from power plants, and natural systems don't ship marble over from Italy. But they create and build the most beautiful things. So can't we learn something from that? Here's a cyclical process of a morning glory, a diurnal process that responds to the diurnal cycle and tracks pollinators for it to continue to grow. Fruit trees are a great example of a solution where they enrich their own soil through the decay of the plant for the next season. Life's principle around integrating development with growth refers to strategies that optimize both development and growth through self-organization, combining modular and nested components, and building from the bottom up. Social insects exhibit behavior that reinforces that individuals are part of a larger functioning organism. As in the left-hand image, I think that's something we often forget. These systems self-organize according to need. The beehive on the right is really a great example of this principle because it is both that kind of organism as a group, but also the beehive itself is modular, nested, built from the bottom up and from local materials. Be resource efficient. This is a fundamental principle that also relates well to the built environment. There's no bling in nature, as beautiful as it is. You must fit form to function, and everything has to have a purpose. Everything serves multiple functions, ideally to minimize resource use while maximizing value. The eagle's wing is perfectly proportioned to respond to the need for speedy flight with the ability to do quick dives and come to an immediate stop. The cactus on the right, both the skeleton and the saguaro cactus, is perfectly adapted to desert conditions to maximize water storage, provide protection, and self-shade. Nature evolves to survive, again, dynamic world that we live in, have to constantly adapt and evolve to survive through replicating strategies that work, integrate the unexpected, and constantly reshuffle information. I love the example of the swallow that used to live in tree trunks and now lives in chimneys because human habitation has taken over their habitat. They just have learned to live in the chimney. The communication process of the termites on the right is delivered chemically to alert the colony very quickly when they need to respond to more food or more soldiers. So they are constantly adapting and evolving. The last principle has to do with life-friendly chemistry. And again, I'm not a chemist. Any chemists in the room? Ooh, good. Oh, was there a yes? All right. All right. So you can beat me up later. So this has to do with not what we do in the typical industrial age manufacturing, where we use, polluting product and very high energy intensive processes, but actually create materials using benign or life-friendly processes with the elements of the periodic table that are non-toxic. The barnacle is such a good example of this. This is, grows underwater, self-assembles, basically only from what's nearby, and it has some of the strongest attachment systems in the planet. So couldn't we learn from the barnacle how to do that without having to create some kind of high energy intensive use? So those are the 6 life's principles. There will be a quiz when I'm done. So how does that work? How do we link biology and design? And the key is around functionality. What function are we trying to achieve in our design of a building, or a community, or a chair? And how can we look to nature to understand some inspiration, model, mentor, measure to come up with a different way to achieve that performance? So there are really 2, I like this because there's 6 principles and 2 things. It's not too many, There are 2 ways to address that kind of functional challenge analysis. One is to identify the challenge and then look to nature for a solution. So the bullet train is a good example of this. When the bullet train was first initiated in Japan and other places, there was a problem with the sonic boom when it headed, reached a certain speed. They broke the sound barrier. How could we avoid this problem? So the designers looked to the kingfisher, because the kingfisher's beak can optimize high-speed movement through a fluid without disturbing the surface tension. And that became the source for, they studied the beak, not just as an inspiration, but they studied, the detail of that form. And it became the source for the successful design of the revised bullet train, you see, right? And, it's also beautiful, right? That's one of those things that happens. The other methodology is through, serendipity, the aha. And the best example of this, I'm sure you've all heard, is the story about the discovery of Velcro by George de Mestral, who was a person who liked to go out on hikes with his dog. And when he'd come back from his hikes, there'd be birds all over the dog and birds all over him. And after many times of picking off the birds, he went, there's something to this. There's a way I can, these birds connect to my clothing, and I can pull them right off. There's no adhesive. Maybe there's something I can learn from this. And he studied the connections of the positive and the negative, and through replication of the forms, came up with the concept of Velcro. So those are the 2 ways to think about how to adapt biomimicry. And a few examples from product design. There's been much more in product design. If you saw Janine Benyus speak when she was here, she went through a litany of product ideas. And they're easier not to do, actually. I think it's very hard to do, but sort of to understand. So looking at adhesives, the Gecko is a great source of solution around how can I have a very durable adhesive that doesn't actually have glue. So the Gecko foot is able to, defy gravity, go up the wall, hang on the ceiling. And scientists in, I think, Stanford have studied that and created something called Gecko Tape, which is now used in medicine, reduces any need for stitches, and I think would be, a great opportunity in the building environment to think about Gecko Tape as a solution as well. A breakthrough in the building side has to do with refracted light. We think of the male peacock feather as having these beautiful colors, this great pigmentation. In fact, there's no pigment at all in a peacock. It's all about light transmittance, refracted light. Also in the morpho butterfly, that beautiful blue color is through light refraction. So this fabric designer, Tijin, must be Asian, came up with a dye-free fabric that's about refraction. So there's no dyes, there's no toxins, there's no, it's not about less bad, it's like no dye at all. And it's this beautiful iridescent color that uses the same principles as in the peacock feather and the morpho whale. Here's an example about drag reduction. The question about how to reduce drag on wind turbines and improve their efficiency led to an investigation into the, I can't even say this word, tubercular pattern on the baleen whale's fin. And because they can move quickly through water with minimal friction. So that was studied and replicated, create an optimized turbine blade. And I love the name of this company, the Whale Power. So there's about many, many more examples, but I know you actually want to get to the built environment, so I'll start with that. I'm going to go through about 7 case studies, some longer, some shorter, of work we've been doing with biomimicry for the last several years, starting really almost in chronological order, to understand what we've done so far and love to think about ways to go from there. The first project we did with the Biomimicry Group was actually a competition. Was not a winning. It was about ideas, not about actually doing a project. For a city of the future, how could Atlanta be different in 100 years? How would you design 100 years from now a different form of the city of Atlanta? And we chose to go about that with using the Biomimicry Group as our collaborators and ask the question, what would Atlanta look like if we created a solution that was completely inspired by nature? So I'm going to go through that pretty fast. We're all familiar with the growth of Atlanta post-World War II as a major hub in the Southeast, and both commercial and transportation, international travel. We also know that rapid growth has had some really deleterious effects in the region. The image on the left is Lake Lanier in 2007. You may recall there was a severe drought. And that was a big aha moment for the people in that region who never had thought about water. And water being a problem. We're seeing a very similar problem now in Houston. There's been no rain in Houston for 3 months. It's just a disaster. And there's a lot of concern about water right now in that part of the world. And on the right, you see, if anybody ever lived in Atlanta, you have. Is this sort of normal, or you run into this a lot? I mean, the way that the building, the sprawl, the classic kind of sprawl development in Atlanta has led to this kind of, dependency on the car and, a possible situation. So, what can we do? How can we learn from the oak hickory forest, which is the natural habitat of Atlanta? How can we learn from the oak hickory forest, of which there's very little left, in terms of designing a different kind of solution for the city? How would nature design a city? That's the question we asked ourselves. On the left, you see the Atlanta in 2008. The riparian corridors are completely destroyed. It's all about growth and sprawl. The water system is broken. And so our solution, we repair the riparian corridors and create nodes of development in between while we restore the ecosystem. This meant that, like nature, we are localizing energy and water. So things happen at a district level instead of at a broad level. And those nodes take on different meaning depending upon their historical context and their placement in the region. And are connected with different forms of transit. So not all single occupancy vehicle dependent. And so this image, and these were, by the way, this was the charrette that we did in a week. So, you kind of generate all these ideas, and that was as far as we got to take it. The new growth and development are connected to transit, and, both all kinds of transit, and then that space in between becomes, discovered land that we can use in new ways. I love this image. On the left is the Freedom Parkway today. On the right is the Freedom Parkway, 100 years later, where we basically have taken back all that land. We never think about the amount of space that we're using on highways. If you, some of us are old enough to remember when they were smaller, but just imagine what we could do with that new property, that new discovered property as a way to rebuild our ecosystems. You know, they can become urban agriculture, wind farms, if there's enough, you know, wind located adjacent, and, you know, new uses, both recreational and commercial. We took this idea of, from nature of succession and old growth. So old growth neighborhood is the neighborhood where we have distinct architectural characteristics, cultural significance, like Martin Luther King's home. His neighborhood is the old growth neighborhood. It's a very small residential neighborhood. It would be retained under this new solution. And while the cultural, the city center densifies and becomes more intelligent in the future, so those buildings can take on more intelligence, and new growth and development is connected by transit. So we've got, just like a forested succession, you know, a city that has that kind of succession. We even came up with this idea of a new wall system that would be like a tree made out of carbon emissions, carbon-based. Why not? Carbon doesn't have to be bad. Carbon has to turn into something that could be good. So let's look at carbon as a resource for a wall. This is what you get to do when you're, you know, you're not necessarily working with a client. We'll get to clients in a minute. But one of the things I thought was fascinating is this year, we also entered a competition we won for a renovation of a mid-century modern government office building. Again, a competition, not a real project, if you will, that was supposed to have a zero environmental footprint. So this is actually a renovation project. And the design team, which was made up of people who were no more than 10 years out of university, so young crowd, came up with this idea of algae wall system. So they would take the polluted air from the Santa Ana freeway, because this is in LA, and turn it and feed it through algae, and it would become an energy source. Dirty air is good, and out comes energy and fresh air. And the, you know, very carefully thought through about the spacing of the bars, you know, based on the orientation and, you know, science behind the algae. This actually has gotten an amazing amount of interest from the algae people. They're being invited to algae conferences. I mean, it's, you know, it is scientifically possible, let's put it that way, to do. And it's, you know, this was just somebody's backroom idea. So I think, you know, it's very biomimetic. Okay, we'll go to some real design projects we're doing with clients. The first one is in Lavasa, which is in southwest, I believe, India. Madhuri would tell me, I bet you. Southwest. And this is a very important part of the world ecologically. You know, some endangered species, flora and fauna, have survived there over a very long time in extreme conditions. The area gets 3 meters of monsoons, water, in a 3-month period, and the rest of the year it's drought conditions. So all the water all at once, too much. So it's nothing like we experience in North America. So what can we learn from this, and how the flora and fauna have survived in this region for the design of a new city? This is a new city design. The current state is unsafe living conditions and heavy erosion that washes away the very precious topsoil. So we brought in our biologist friends, you see on the left, and they did what they call the Genius of Place report. So they walked around the site and dug holes and looked up in trees and picked up critters, and they came back and said, here's what happens. And we're like, you're kidding, because we know how to do climate studies, wind and rain and geography, and, you know, we know how to do all that, but we don't know how it works underground. They came back with all kinds of ideas about how, you know, the world of the habitat, of the natural systems work in this valley. They created what we call a Genius of Place report. We gave them 5 functional challenges, that term. We wanted them to investigate. You can see here things like soil stability, dealing with the monsoons, dealing with the lack of water. So we gave them 5 functional challenges, and we said, tell us how nature solves these problems here in this site. So having to do with the monsoons, rapidly eroding, trying to get back to my notes. Here it is. Oh yeah, okay, so this one is that canopy, there's actually no water ever reaches the ground coming from above, because the canopy dissipates all the energy of the falling water through a series of layers. So that's a condition that we typically don't do in our built environment. And that, clearly has some potential. Another erosion control strategy is to reduce energy flow, the flow of water horizontally by having, a layer of detritus on the forest floor. So in this case, you see the bamboo leaves create a carpet that really delays any absorption of water, and again could have some direct applicability to our design. Looking at the other side about water management during the dry periods, the Manakara plant actually stores water vertically through hydraulic redistribution and then brings it back up through pressure at different times of the year. So, could we do this in our buildings? Could our support structures actually, the piers of our columns actually also have water retention capability? We could then pump back up hydraulically when we need that water later. So this is just an image from the designers early in the project, taking these ideas and trying to understand how we might adapt them through, a roof system that has multiple canopies, looking at ways that could be used in the design. Near this site in Pune, outside Pune, is another project we've been doing it's a special economic zone. SEZ stands for Special Economic Zone. And this is we call it's KEDZ is the name for it. And here this concept of closed loops really became a major design goal. How could we do this project so that over time, not immediately, but over time, everything would have a closed loop. All the energy, all the water, all the waste would remain on site. And what was particularly exciting about this idea is it went beyond the environmental loop, but also thinking about the way this business park actually was planned, so that the businesses that occupy this park are collaborative or cooperative. One business's waste is another business's food, if you will. So that input-output worked within the project itself. And another thing that we're doing on this project that I think has great potential, if we can find the right way to move it forward, is to look at environmental performance standards, which is a term in the natural systems world for defining, the metrics that go with the performance of environmental systems. So how much energy is generated on the site, how much carbon is sequestered, how much water is retained. If we can understand those metrics, and that's what the Biomimicry Group was doing with us for this particular project, they came up with metrics for key variables like this that then became the benchmark that we tried to design to. Not immediately, but over time. If our long-term goal is to be like nature, then can we perform like nature? So it's not just inspiration from how nature functions, but also the kind of outcomes. A quick look at a built project that is derived from some of these principles, not working directly with the Biomimicry Group, is the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, or KAUST, which is a new research university in Saudi Arabia that was completed, I think, fall of 10. The underlying design principles for this project were really derived from the local vernacular, and the local vernacular is very much derived from the local habitat. So the mashrabiyya screens, which are very much derived from the palm and the shade and shadow that is provided through the palm, filter the intense light. I've never actually been to Saudi Arabia, but these images are so evocative. Create beautiful patterns, and also, back to biophilia, you connect with the day. Those patterns move throughout the day. They became a major design vehicle for this project. The use of the souk, covered open areas, self-shading, also provided a major source just like the self-shading characteristics of that area for the design. And I'm not going into this project some other time maybe, but this is, what we did was take some of those inspirations and translate them into contemporary architecture that became, this is an outdoor space in the university that is a walkway that is completely covered with this kind of dappled light. Here's an example of a really interesting structural inspiration from nature for a new residential tower in Korea. Here are the engineers. This wasn't HOK. It was Arab, actually. Were inspired by the human spine. And they said, the human spine is a miracle. And, there must be something about how the spine works that we could think about to create a building that uses minimal materials and has this opportunity for curvature, just like the spine. Repetitive parts, slightly moving, and in a spiral pattern. And they did all the math, and they recognized that this was a very efficient, very stable solution. And this is a rendering of that design. A project that we're doing in South America has actually, a building project again, has very deep biological collaboration. And I'm not going to be able to go into much of it, but just one example is the use of the water retention capabilities of the bromeliad. So this is in South America, looking at the mid-Atlantic rainforest very deeply and how that functions. The bromeliad is an important plant in that area, and it actually collects its water without any roots. So it's an air plant, and it holds it in this little tank, and you can see in the top left. And that bromeliad became a major, design element for this building, and even mimics the form a little bit and the color as a roof element, as a water storage element, and on the inside becomes a vertical element where the water, so you can see the rainwater as it's held up there, the light coming through, and then it becomes a vertical element transporting the water down into a living machine down below, and an educational element. So there's a lot about education that's incorporated into this design, so people can understand how the water systems work and relate it back to the native habitat, because in many places of the world we've lost that connection. So it's a very exciting project. I'm really thrilled about it. How am I doing on time? Okay. The last thing we're doing, I've been doing with the Biomimicry Group, and one I'm just so excited about because I think it could go somewhere in a different way, is what we call the Genius of Biome report. So remember the Genius of Place that I talked about we did in India, which was looking at this one location. This, the Genius of Biome idea came from a challenge from the design leaders at HOK, which said, I want to be able to work with biomimicry, and I want to be able to understand how to bring that to my project, but not every client wants to do this. Not every client will pay for a Genius of Place report. Not every client will pay to have the biologists in on the team. In fact, it's a pretty rare client that is ready to take that kind of, because this isn't free, they cost just like we do. So they said, is there any way to do that? And we said, we could look at the world by biome instead of by place, instead of by country, instead of by continent. We look by biome, which recognizes there are, I can't remember, 18 biomes globally or something like that. And where there are some, of course, there are variations across biomes, but there are consistent things about those biomes in terms of rainfall, whether there's multiple seasons, the kind of flora and fauna that inhabit those biomes. And can we look by biome? So we said, let's try it. And we started with the temperate broadleaf forest biome, which is the one where most of our offices, not all of them, in fact, probably maybe half of our offices are located in this biome, but we do a lot of work in this biome. Let's look at the temperate broadleaf forest as our first biome study. And again, this was a co-production of biomimicry, biologists, and HOK design. And we said, let's identify 5 areas we want to investigate, looking across functional challenges: water, energy, materials, social systems, and economic systems. So we decided to sort of expand this experiment beyond environmental, sort of traditional environmental, to social, and economic. Because we really want to think about, when we're designing, the economic solution, social solutions, a triple bottom line, if you remember, not just the environmental solutions. That's really what it will take to achieve the kind of sustainability, this world where we actually are able to create conditions conducive to life, which is the biomimetic definition of sustainability. That's my preferred definition, to create conditions conducive to life. And it doesn't matter whose life we're talking about. Flora, fauna, people, we have to have conditions that are going to continue to allow those species to exist. So we looked at water, energy, materials, social and economic, and we identified functional questions, and actually designers from those biomes, we got them on a phone call and we said, what's an issue that you want to grapple with around water? And you can't really see this, but minimize erosion is a consistent problem in this biome. It's our biome right here. Dehumidification is another problem. Adjusting to temperature change, seasonal change. So we asked these questions of our biologist friends. We said, go to this biome, seek, and tell us what you find. And it wasn't quite that simple. And so this is an example of a couple pages out of the Biome report. It's an interactive document. It's not a website. So the question had to do with minimizing erosion in the in this region. And the solution, the inspiration, was in this case a beaver dam. So beaver dams are arranged in a stair-step pattern that descends through drainages, reducing the kinetic energy of stream flow and benefiting the ecosystem in many different ways. On the top left, you see the first page of these are actually 4 pages on the right here, which describes the beaver dam and how it works. And it's very simple language, because we said architects don't read, don't give us too much, and a very simple diagram that, we can understand. So that's the first piece of the report. Then on the right is an abstracted design principle. So explain to us how that works outside the beaver dam. And another diagram that shows how, a series of chambers will slow water down. And then on the bottom left is what they call their biologist brainstorm. So these are ideas that the biologists had about how you might take that strategy and apply it. On the bottom right is a design sketch that we did. It's just meant to sort of be an initial idea to populate this guidebook, and we want to have more and more ideas and throw out the bad ones and put in more good ones and eventually have built ones. But in this case, and I know you can't see very well, the idea is in this particular design solution where we're doing multiple buildings, to look at those buildings as interconnected rooftops that provide a leakage barrier system, just like a beaver dam. So they each kind of slow down the water flow and serve as a holding pattern. Instead of them being independent, think of them as a collective. So I'm really excited about this Genius of Biome, and I think it has real merit. So in conclusion, I think our experiment in bringing biomimicry to the built environment in the last several years has certainly convinced me that this could work. There is something there. The nature does work at all scales and can be a source of inspiration for many different problems that we're all facing. Nature doesn't care who has the idea. We just have to look outside. And it's hard. It's hard work. We're not natural scientists. We're designers, and architects is science and art. But to really understand it, we need a deeper understanding of science and how it works. And that's where the opportunity and the real challenge is. But our goal, if we're really successful, is to do what Janine Benyus says so eloquently. When the city and forest are functionally indistinguishable, then we'll be at home on this planet. If we can have the same outcomes as a forest by creating a new kind of city, we might survive. So there you go. That's where we are. Thank you. I think I have 5 minutes. 5 whole minutes. Big questions, comments? Yes. Oh, well, you're asking me to go into something that I'm not going to necessarily know how to do. The designer on this is so eloquent, talking about the way the algae works. Let me see if I can pull this up. The the algae is growing inside those tubes, and it needs CO2 to grow. So we're driving the air through the tubes, growing the algae, putting it through a process to generate energy, generate, in this case, some kind of movement that will pull out energy, and then the outcome of that is fresh air, and that's as much as I probably is written in here, but algae experts, yes. You, yeah. Oh, I think this concept is not limited to architecture, biology. I mean, it applies to any, science. And as I even said, it could apply to child psychology. I mean, I think there's room there for how to use the ideas in very, very different ways. I would throw the question to you about how to use it. I don't think you're limited to the kinds of examples I've given here at all. In fact, the book that Janine Benyus wrote, that biomimicry book, talks about any number of industries and about how to bring natural systems thinking to those industries. Food, science, banking, I mean, you name it. The specific books was a question. There's a whole body of work that's growing around this topic, and the biomimicry folks are creating their own coursework, and they're collaborating with institutions. There are some universities across the country that have a relationship and are developing their own biomimicry program. So there's a lot going on in the last 10 years. Bruce. Great, I didn't know that. Yeah.
That last thing,
Not yet, not yet. We're still working on finishing it and figuring out what we're going to do with how we're going to use it. I'd love to find funding to do more, and make it interactive and all kinds of cool things, but it's not available at this point. I think we'll head that way. Haven't got it figured out yet. We're really open source kind of firm. I mean, Hamadri mentioned the HOK guidebook that I helped author. That was actually derived from some material we just did in-house to try to understand how to bring sustainable thinking to projects, and we ended up sort of giving it away. And then at some point, a publisher came to us and said, would you like to write, turn that into a book? And we said, okay, yeah, sure. One more question. Then I got to run. Yes.
So, Asia found out that they are projecting now, and this is the context of India, India, China. In the next 40 years or 50 years, there is going to be a 6 to 8-fold increase in the number of people.
Yeah.
And if we take that, keep that in our mind, how do you think that these new innovative ideas, all of those buildings that are being built, are going to be around for a very long time?
Boy, I mean, you're asking the $64 million question, Madri. I think it will take, innovative thinking. It will take enlightened leadership, including zoning and planning. It will take, some innovation in terms of technologies. I mean, certainly some breakthrough technologies, but I don't think we have to wait for that at all. And, often with those kinds of things, if we can find a few examples of, a leading edge thinking community or some case business that can show people how it could work, then it can really skyrocket. So, we're not looking for everything all at once. If we can find a few places that will really look in, we're doing some really innovative work in China. One thing the Chinese have on us is getting stuff done. If they want to do something one way, you don't have to worry about zoning and other, focus groups. So I I think it's all about the next, several, maybe 10 to 20 years to try to find ways to replicate these in a visible way that then people could say, I see the alternative. It doesn't have to be the Western style solution. There's a different way. And that's what we're trying to do, is create that pathway. I think absolutely, Bruce. It's much more in the developing world. The examples I showed today, South America, India, Korea. We're also doing work in China. But, I'd love to see that happen in my backyard, but it's a very different set of challenges. I have to go. Sorry. Thank you.